Doing well.
Doing great. Good to see you.
Good, you too.
All right. Well, we'll probably have a few more join us here as we get started, but I want to make the most of our time together. Talking to uh, Jeremiah from the Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada. And I'll let Jeremiah introduce himself, kind of share a little bit about what his role is, and then we'll talk through some of this notebook that that Church Vitalization Canada put together for a summit. Let Jeremiah talk a little bit about what that summit was all about as well. But if you don't have access to that handbook, I can drop it in the chat so you can refer to it. But I think Jeremiah is
Mhm.
going to share his screen as well. So Jeremiah,
Yeah,
welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself and Church Revitalization Canada.
sweet. Yeah, go ahead and drop that. Might as well drop that in the chat so that everyone can take a look at it. And
Awesome.
so yeah, as Austin mentioned, really coming to you from Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada, and I'm just really thankful to be here sharing about our journey, our story, turning around a network, and then I'm going to kind of talk to you a little bit about kind of how we've been coaching our churches into revitalization. I live in Edmonton, Alberta, and I'll just kind of share my screen and I give you a little overview of kind of where we are, who we are, and feel free to drop any questions in the chat. And yeah, we can just chat from there. So just to give you an idea, Alberta is there in the orange there, right above Montana. So you know kind of where you are, where we are. And that's kind of we pastoring, we've got churches there. And so I'll just kind of give you a little overview here. These are our churches in Alberta and the Northwest Territory. So the Northwest Territory is just above Alberta. And there's 4.5 million souls in our region. We have about 120 churches and 480 credential holders. And so we're a part of the Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada. So we're a district of that, much like you folks have in Assemblies of God if you're from there. And so Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada really is the sister denomination or fellowship of the Assemblies of God. And we got 1,100 churches. We're probably the largest evangelical denomination in Canada. But yeah, we've been plateaued for 30 years, for
Mm.
3 decades. So the district there, the Alberta Northwest Territories district, is what we call a middle judicatory. So that's important just to note because it's kind of part of how we've been able to see what we've been seeing in our district as opposed to nationally. And then another thing that's important to note is that probably a lot like the Assemblies of God, we're called a cooperative fellowship of churches. So we stay away from the term denomination. I mean, we're a denomination, but they use that term cooperative fellowship. But it's kind of funny because some of our churches aren't so cooperative. We can't really force anybody to do anything. We can't place pastors or remove pastors. We have the credentialing, but that's all we really have. So that's kind of where we're at and kind of what we're dealing with here.
Hey,
So I
what's
wanted to
I noticed the square kilometers. What's that in miles, Jeremiah? I know you've got a big territory to cover there.
Oh my God, I don't know. You gotta Google. You gotta Google it.
It's not you're not dealing with big clusters of churches primarily, right? I mean, it's spread out along a
Yeah,
big
and you
geographic
can
area.
see, like you can see here, like we got Edmonton and Calgary, our two major kind of city centers, and Calgary is kind of the closest to the 49th parallel there, and Edmonton's where I live, and most of our churches and ministries are in those two urban centers. But we've got a lot of rural congregations, and this is what's important because when we talk about revitalizing, we've actually seen a lot of revitalization in the rural small church areas. So we'll talk about that and kind of how we've been able to see that. But just to give you context in our story, because it's important that you understand kind of like just our journey. And there's two different lines here. One is Alberta Northwest Territory, so the district, and the other one is the rest of the POC. And I just want you to kind of see our attendance here. We started our journey in 2016, and we began to actively work with revitalizing churches, helping churches turn around. I'll talk about that in a moment. And you can see the kind of the difference. So here we got that green line going up until 2020, and then of course everything drops because we don't have any data to support. And then now you see starting in 2021, the line comes back up, and we continue to grow. But now the rest of our denomination is growing, and that's largely because by the time we hit 2020, we've been able to be quite an influence in the rest of our denomination while still leading from our middle judicatory. And so just again to show you, these are the provinces: British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. This is how it's all broken down for us. And you just can kind of see what we've been dealing with, increasing and decreasing over the last 7, 8 years. This is our attendance. Again, I just want to focus in on our region, Alberta Northwest Territories. And again, just to show you, by God's grace, what we have been seeing. And of course, like I've told you, we were in a 30-year plateau, okay? 3 decades of plateau in the Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada. In our particular district, when we started, only 12% of our churches were growing by reaching lost people. 82% of our churches were dead or declining. I think in 2016, when I came, we closed 7 churches. In 2017, we closed 5. We closed 3. We've been merging some churches now, which are still closures, even though they sound nicer. But yeah, like we just see that. And of course, in Canada, just to understand, we're like kind of 8% of our population on average are Christians. So it's pretty low comparative. And so we would call ourselves post-Christian, a lot like what you would be experiencing probably in the UK and Australia. You've just got this different mentality, and a real aversion, almost at sometimes it's militant, especially depending if you go to different provinces like Quebec, where it's like 1% is Christian. So it's like very, very almost would consider it an unreached people. So um, it's an interesting landscape, but here's what I want you to see is I want you to see that we're bucking the trend, right? We're going against the trend. The trend in Canada is to go down. And look, we're seeing growth. And then these are our salvations. And these are the numbers that we really love to track: salvations and baptisms. But again, you see just the reality. And again, from 2016 to 2019 really is where we've seen a huge amount of the growth and momentum. Of course, COVID takes that away, but we're starting to see that again. And I suspect, even though, by the time we get to the end of 2024, we'll see these numbers in 2024 as an increase. And so to God be the glory, right? Because honestly, like we can't do anything, but this is our story. And this is why we have the opportunity to speak not only to our fellowship nationally, but also a lot of other denominations in Canada, because they look at what is happening in our province in Alberta with our 120 churches, and they say, okay, what's going on here? I mean, just this past Sunday, I had like 5 texts come to me, 12 salvations. One guy did 30 baptisms on Sunday, like 30 baptisms in our churches. Like, it's just, we never had that. We never had that. It was very, yeah, it was very low key. I've been in our district since 2010 working with one of our growing churches. And then in 2016, I came in on staff at our district office. And honestly, like from 2010 to 2016, it was very low key. We weren't seeing a lot of that stuff. We weren't celebrating churches that are returning around. We weren't doing any of that stuff in our district. We were mostly focused on what I would call renewal. This idea of more fire, more rain was always kind of the cry, but we weren't talking about reaching lost people. And so I want to just talk to you about our operational understanding. Because you just need to understand kind of how we come at for church revitalization. We look at a prevailing church as a soul winning, disciple making church. That's how we define it. So that's the words we use: soul winning, disciple making. Because there's always 2 components to this. It's not just about church growth, it's about disciples. And it's not just about disciples, it's about disciples who make disciples. So that's how we've kind of coalesce that. And if we can get that going and that conversation started, are you a soul winning, disciple making church? We find that we get to the right answers. We initiated back in 2016 a call to fruitfulness as well as faithfulness. So a lot of pastors will tell you like, oh, I'm just faithful. And we would say, well, yeah, but God has called you to be fruitful. John 15 talks about this, right? He talks about chopping off the branch, pruning the branch, throwing in the fire. Like there's this crazy, and it's not about the fruit of the Spirit, but a lot of people will tell you it's not. It's about kingdom advancement. That's that whole passage. Where's the kingdom of light advancing against the kingdom of darkness? And so in addition to other factors, we would define a prevailing church as seeing a 5% incremental growth. So like again, if you're a church growth person, this is really small, almost insignificant. Most healthy rate of growth is between 10 to 12%, 8 to 12%. So we're just saying a 5% incremental growth. And then we would challenge to see 10% of total attendance in salvation decisions year over year. So like I pastored a church of 20 people last year and I saw 2 people come to Christ. That's what we would be like, yes, thumbs up. It's not again, we're not talking 50,000. We're not talking like church, everybody wants to see thousands, my whole town saved. Yeah, great. But just take your attendance. If you're a church of 40, could you believe for 4? That's it. You don't go crazy. It's like, and you know what happens when you believe for that 10%? You often get more. You often see more. But that's just kind of our how we've defined it. And we found our churches just really taking a hold of that. And again, this is important to note that when we talk about prevailing churches, we want to reach lost people. We don't want to shuffle sheep. And like I said to you in Canada here, like that's a huge market share for us because it's almost like 86% of Canadians are non-Christian. So that's massive. And yet most of our growth in our churches comes from people moving from one church to another. And even now in Canada, we have a large immigration. And so people will come from other countries, Christians will come from other countries, and we'll say, oh, look at that, our church is growing. And I'll say, there's still much more work to do, right? So that's important that you understand. I'll just kind of say that a lot of what I'm talking about comes from these books. So we like it. I love Alton. We read Acts 2, we use Acts 2, but this is how we got started in this was through Paul Borden. And he's a Baptist guy who did this in California in the 1990s. And he saw 100 churches, turn around, and then he planted 100 more 10 years after that. And so he's been our kind of our guide in a lot of this and a lot of our understanding. So these are the books we use. And then recently we've been really reading this Quietly Courageous by Gilles Rendle, which is an awesome book to read if you haven't read it. It is powerful. It's a Methodist who's kind of talking about asking the right questions in regards to organizational change. So this is again, going back to our operational understandings, we say this: large churches don't turn networks around. So you'll be in a church, you might have a network, you might have like some large churches in your network, and they're growing, but they don't turn your network around. They just continue to grow. And so, in order to turn your network around, you've got to work with all of the churches, not just the large ones. And then, like I said before, we have discovered that it's the middle judicatory, so that district level, not the national or the local church, but the middle judicatory is the key for turning networks around. So if we want to turn a network around, we need to start there. And then here's a big thing that we've learned is 80% of pastors can lead prevailing churches with help. So we just started with that assumption that there's 10% of pastors that don't need our help. They can go to a conference, read a book, and they can figure it out. There's 10% of our pastors that probably shouldn't be in vocational ministry, but there's 80% of our pastors that they can lead prevailing churches with help. And so that's what's caused us as a district to kind of take this coaching model, which I'll talk about in a moment, to help our pastors. And then another important thing is to recognize that network leaders must exercise their prophetic voice. So the whole point of like district leaders just maintaining or just kind of keeping everyone happy, it's not helpful. And so our leader, Gary Tatinger, he's our district superintendent. He began to exercise that voice and call churches to fruitfulness, call leaders like, hey, there must be more. What can we do? Let's keep going and growing. And even just last week, we had our prayer gathering, and he's once again just talking about churches that are changing lives and turning things around. And I mean, it's all over him. And he continues to exercise that prophetic voice. And so rather than try and keep people happy, like push out and say what's on your heart and mind, which a lot of our network leaders, I find, are nervous to do for one reason or another. So I just want to go right back again to our story because I really want you to catch this. So this is again Alberta, and I've only got up to 2019 because this is when we started in 2016, and I just want you to see that uptick until we hit the dark period there. But look at that uptick. Look what's happened here. We never changed pastors in those 4 or 5 years. We used the pastors we had. We we just changed how we came at it. That's it. You see the salvation numbers. We didn't change, we didn't replace, like we can't replace pastors, but this is our story. And you see that uptick, and you see the churches that are growing and plateaued and decline. And it's interesting, in that final year, 2019, that number of decline churches drops to 24. Like it's crazy. Like I said, when we started in 2016, most of our churches were declining or plateaued. Only 12% of our churches were growing. And that number has now, I think we have 64% of our churches now in 2023 growing by, like I said, reaching lost people. So that's a real key indicator. So this is how we kind of came at this when it comes to transforming a network. And this is in your book. It's kind of in that second section. And this is the section I'm going to kind of focus on, because it's going to kind of lead on to everything else before and after that section. The first session that we did in that book is all about defining what a prevailing church is, which I kind of did an overview, and I'm happy to answer questions if you have. But this second session here that we did is about transforming a network. And I really want to focus on this, because whether you're a coach or a district leader or you're part of a district, this is what can happen, needs to happen in your district, wherever you find yourself. But it has to be a priority. Revitalization has to be the priority in your district. And here's how we defined it. The church is Christ's only tool to fulfill the Great Commission he gave to his followers before he ascended into heaven. So we just believe it, that this is it. There is no plan B. The church is the primary tool that Christ chose to fulfill the commission that he gave to his disciples. So churches exist. Why they're here? Like, churches do a lot of things. Hey, they do potlucks, they do services, they do outreach, they do soup kitchens, but they exist to fulfill the Great Commission. Make disciples who make disciples. That's what we believe. And so we believe that if churches exist to fulfill the Great Commission, then the network or the denomination exists to help churches fulfill the Great Commission. So that's how we see ourselves. We don't see ourselves as running retreats or we're going to do this and that. But we see, no, our job as a district is to help you as the local church fulfill the Great Commission in your locale. So church vitalization must become the one big thing that you do, and everything else must be refocused or realigned to fulfill this mandate. So when we started in 2016, our district got out of the things that the local church should be doing. We got out of kids camps. We got out of youth camps, running youth camps. Why would a district run a youth camp? A church can run a youth camp that will actually service the church's mission. Why is the district running men's retreats? Let the church run the men's retreat. I mean, we can use the district camp, we can help them out, but like, let's get out of the things that the local church should be doing, and the district can help the local church fulfill its mission and mandate of fulfilling the Great Commission, reaching lost people, making disciples who make disciples. So that's what we did. We got out of everything like that, and we started to focus on what's going to help us make disciples who make disciples. And so we called it the one big thing, the OBT. And so if you talk to anyone in our district, this is what they'll tell you. This is what we're about. If you go into abnwt.com and you look at our district website, you kind of go, you should be able to pick up that this is what we're doing. And we've had people even the last year join our district as pastors, and it's like, whoa, you guys are really focused on souls, hey? And we're like, yeah, you guys are really focused on lost people. It's like, yeah, this is what we're about here. Now, there's lots of good things. We talk about soul care, and we talk about, a lot of good things. But what the whole point of it is, how are we as churches fulfilling the Great Commission? How are we reaching lost people? Yes, we want to be healthy leaders so that, we want to have our good education so that. So it's all about this one big thing. And so this is kind of that second page of that session there on your booklet. And that just kind of talks about how we've aligned everything towards revitalization, revitalizing churches to be soul-winning, disciple-making churches. And I'm going to just talk quickly about all the other areas, and then I'll zero in on coaching, because I think that's what Austin wanted me to talk about.
Yeah, I'm gonna blow this slide up and put it on my plaster it on my front door of my office. Jeremiah, this is great.
So if you want to change, like, I don't know if you guys are parts of districts or what you call them, regions or whatever, but if you want to see that, if you can get your district leader to take everything. This is what I think all districts do. I think it could be other things, but I try to use C words because that was Pentecostal and try to just kind of show you how we took everything towards revitalizing churches. So communications, we took everything we did with communications. So we actually changed our name from district office to district resource center. And every piece of communication became not only communication, but resourcing. I didn't put that in there because it's not a C word, but communications and resourcing. We became a resource. And again, if you go on our website, you'll see training and blogs and articles. We just said, okay, everything we do is going to be about resourcing you to reach lost people. And it just became a part of everything that we do. So if you subscribe, you can do that on our newsletter, abnwt.com, and you can get our monthly newsletter. You'll see everything we do is about good news stories, people coming to Jesus. It's all about moving us towards this end. And of course, there's other things we have to communicate. I'm not saying we don't communicate that, but it's always got this bent of soul winning, disciple making churches, 4.5 million souls in Alberta. This is who we're called to. We always are moving our communications and resourcing towards that. We did podcasts. We do weekly articles that are all about practical ways that churches can grow by reaching lost people. Like you can look at our website, and again, I'll put it in the chat when I'm finished here. All of our communications became about soul winning, disciple making churches. And then we went on to conferences. So we do like a ministers gathering, which is like our annual district conference every year. And we just changed that whole thing to be about soul winning, disciple making churches. Like our first year, I think we called it sharpening your axe. And the whole conference was about just gearing up to reach lost people. And we had people come in. We had Paul Borden come in and share stories of churches who've revitalized. We told stories of churches who are in our district who are revitalizing, their church and reaching lost people. We had moments where we put all the cities in our region on a piece of paper, and everyone came up and prayed for the souls in that region. Like it just turned from like a conference on the ministry to like a soul winning conference. And we did that year after year after year. Last year, our whole conference was called Acts, and we talked about the acts prompted by our faith. And our whole thing was about becoming a solution provider in your community. And so we had challenged people, don't just pastor your church, pastor your community. Be a solution provider, work with people. And so from there, we've got people on city council working with city council for homeless issues. We've got now churches who are engaged in housing issues. We've got we're changing the narrative, and we do that through our conferences. Every conference we do is all about revitalizing churches to be soul winning, disciple making churches. And that's just what we've just said. That's what we're doing from now on. Even our credentialing process, we're changing that to again talk about, tell us how you evangelize. Like again, I don't know what your process, but our process is a lot about theology and what doctrine and what do you believe and tick these boxes and stuff like that. But let's have a conversation about, don't come here if you don't want to reach lost people. And I've said that so many times to potential pastors and candidates. I've just said to them like, hey, if you don't want to grow your church by reaching lost people, if you don't want to see salvations, if you don't want to do baptisms, let's not come here. So I'm working with a guy right now. We're bringing him up to the Northwest Territories, and I mean, we need people up there. It's a remote location. We can't get anybody up there. But yet, I'm not bringing this guy up here if he's not a soul winner, you know? And so we're just making sure that even in our credentialing process, our colleges, man, that was one thing that was crazy to us when we first started, that our Bible colleges were teaching students that people don't come to Jesus. You know, that evangelism is not God's plan. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. The president of the Bible college stood up there at a chapel and said, we pray for it, but we don't work for it. We don't. And I'm thinking, what? We don't. What do you mean? We don't have conversations. We're not prepared to give testimony of the hope we have. Like, what the heck? Anyway, that guy's no longer the president, but that's how we started. Like, come on. And we began to change that. And again, we now, our district now is in our Bible colleges. So we have a guy, we took our youth director position, like I told you. We said, why do we have a youth director? Let's have a next gen, a young leaders network leader. And so this guy is actually in our Bible colleges working with third year students who identify themselves as wanting to go into full-time vocational ministry. And he starts working with them from their third year until their second or third year of ministry. And he coaches them to fruitfulness. He coaches them how to navigate their leader, how to navigate their situation, how to reach people, whether the youth pastor, kids pastor, senior pastor, associate. He's starting that process in the third year. And that's kind of how what we've done to change the kind of the flavor of the Bible college to be about souls, about souls, about souls. Like, how are we reaching lost people in Canada? And then we go to camps, and this is a tough one because camps, for Pentecostals, everybody likes to come to and have a good Holy Ghost hoedown, but we just started bringing in prevailing church pastors. That's what we did. So we just started bringing in the pastors who were reaching lost people in our province, and we just had them preach and have them tell their stories. And you know what started to happening is the people who started attending camps was like, you know what, we should do the same thing. And they would go back to their pastor and say, how come we're not doing this? And again, like the numbers don't lie, like the salvations, the baptisms, this is showing you, and of course there's much more than those metrics, but it's showing you the momentum shift to reversing the trend. And remember, everything else in Canada is going this way. We're going this way. Everything else in Canada is saying less religion, less Christianity, and we're actually bucking the trend. In Edmonton, we have a church that's one of the largest PLC churches, one of the largest churches in Canada, 5,000 people. I mean, over the last 30, 40 years, it's gone this way when the rest of Canada's gone this way in terms of its influence, in terms of salvations, baptisms, and because they're focused on the Great Commission. I'm going to skip coaching and go down to church transitions. This kind of speaks for itself, but we've taken those opportunities where there is no pastor to not just provide an interim pastor, but provide a transitional pastor who's going to change the church, get ready the church to change, to revitalize. And of course, like, you folks know this, like, the biggest opposition that we have to revitalization is not non-Christians, it's Christians who don't want to change. They're stuck. That's why they call it the unstuck group. I mean, I love that. They're trying to get people unstuck. We're stuck in the way that we remember things. When I go into a church, I always ask myself, what year is it here? Is it 1950? Is it 1980? Is it 1994? They got their flags, they're waving. Like, what year? We get stuck in a cultural moment, and we've drifted off mission. And all we have to do as coaches is pull them back and make everything about souls. And that's why if you look on the first couple pages of that booklet that Austin gave you, it's all about the one main thing. And I get it that the church is more like, there's so much more going on than evangelism. I get that. I get that there's worship. I get that there's hospitality. I get that but if that leg of the stool, we're not leaning on that leg of the stool, guess what? We're just going to get stuck. We got to lean on the outbound piece. And so, as you can see, all of these areas in any district, I don't care if you go into any district, you're working with any district. We had one of our coaches go down to, I think it was the Dallas or the Texas district, the AG, and just kind of asked the question of this district, like, hey, give me a church in the Dallas area that you would call soul winning, disciple making. Like, they're seeing people come to Christ, and they got large churches there, but the people in the district, I guess, said, oh, I don't know, I can't think of one. He's like, what? So I mean, I don't care what size church you are. I don't care if your budget is met. I think there's always something to look at when you're focused on this. And when your district is focused on other things, like everybody, there's so many things that you can get focused on, then guess what happens? Nothing gets done. You don't get this. You only get this by leaning everything towards that. It's like a trade win. Everything has to lean towards soul winning and disciple making churches. So let me talk about coaching, because that's an aspect of coaching and of basically, I think, how we've seen the growth we've seen in our district. So here's the key thing. Coaches have had to have been in the boiler room of a prevailing church. This is key. We didn't hire anybody who hasn't been part of a prevailing church. And what did I say prevailing church was? Incremental growth 5% and 10% salvation. So they had to have been in a church where they're seeing salvations every year, they're growing every year. Otherwise, we wouldn't hire them. And that's important because sometimes districts hire coaches or they hire people who need work. And that's not what we want to do. You have got to have seen it. You have got to have been in the boiler room of a church that's growing and managing growth. I mean, like I said, when we started this process 7 years ago, all of our churches were 82% of our churches were dying. Now, 62% of our churches are growing. We've got cohorts. How do I go to double services? How do I raise up more pastors? These are the problems we're dealing with now. And of course, as coaches, we've been there. I've been there. I've done that with a growing church. So I can coach us into that because I've been in the boiler room of a growing church. And so you need to have been in the boiler room of a prevailing church. And then here's how we did it. We started with building trust. We did not come into our pastors, 400 pastors, and tell them what to do. We simply called them up and I said, hey, I'm Jeremiah. I'm new in the district. Just, I'm a coach. Just connecting in. How you doing? How's it going? And most of the pastors were like, oh, I'm good, and talked to me. Some of them knew me. I only had a couple of people that swore at me. One person said, why are you calling me? I pay my tithes. Okay. But most of it was just in that first month of coaching in 2017, I called everybody once a month, and that's 400 pastors. And we had a couple other coaches do it. We called it an avalanche of engagement. And it was not about telling you what to do. It was just about checking in. How are you doing? How's it going? What's happening at your church? And again, because I have those underlying assumptions, I'm working those assumptions or those operational understandings as I'm talking with them, but they don't know I'm doing it. I'm just working it. I'm just saying, hey, have you had any new people come to your church? Yeah, a couple new people. Oh, yeah. What happened? Did they come back? Well, no. Okay. Well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Oh, and I give them some early wins, but I'm just building trust, building trust, building trust. And honestly, sometimes that looks like coaching, like really, intentional coaching. And sometimes I just send people memes. I just send pastors memes just to build trust, just to connect with them and let them know they're not alone. Then we adopted this Home Depot model. You guys have Home Depot in the States, right? Yeah, I
Yeah.
thought you did.
Yeah.
You can do it, we can help. So rather than tell them what to do, we said, no, you do it. You can do it. We'll come alongside you. And what we tried to do is go what I call shoulder to shoulder as opposed to face to face. We're shoulder to shoulder and looking at the problem together. So we'll come into a situation and be like, what are you facing? And I just watched one of our pastor's sermons today. I caught it on Facebook and I watched the whole thing today and I realized, okay, he's really struggling because he was preaching pretty aggressively towards his congregation. But I'm not going to come at him like this. I'm going to get on side with him and say, hey, I watched your sermon. Help me understand what's going on, bro. How you feeling? Because I'm pretty sure I know how he's feeling based on what I heard him say to his congregation yesterday or on Sunday. Just work with him. And okay, but he can do it. He has to do it. I'm going to help him. Uh, we work with early adopters and we get easy wins. So one of the things with revitalization is coaches, they'll tell you, hey, go to the worst church, and then help that church out. And I'm saying, don't start there. If you've never done revitalization in a district, start with your early adopters, churches that are already incrementally growing and help them get even more growth. If you start with your sick and dying churches, it's gonna die. And so you need to start with your healthier churches, early adopters, and then don't start with your sick churches. If you start with your sick churches and you spend too much time with your sick churches, guess what's going to happen? It's not going to go, and then you're going to get a bad reputation. That we saw that in one of our districts where they started with like 5 sick churches. 3 of them started growing, but 2 of them died basically as they were trying to revitalize them, and that got a bad reputation. And that was 7 years ago, and they haven't even touched revitalization since because it's got such a bad reputation in their district. And it's just not true. It's all lies, but because of what happened, it just didn't start well. So you got to see easy and early wins, and then that's how you build. If you start with the hard stuff and you get stuck, because you will get stuck. I mean, I've been in situations where I had one guy literally tell me, I don't want to see people come to Christ in my church. I'm having a hard enough time dealing with the ones I have. I said, okay, I will work with you. It's okay. He's one of the guys I just send memes to now. But it's like you got to see the early wins. And here's the thing, you got to tell the story of turnaround churches. And that's what we do every year at our conferences. We tell the story of churches who've gone from plateaued or declining to thriving every single year, 3, 4, 5, 6 churches. We get them up there. We have them do the 5 by 5, 5 minutes, 5 people, 5 minutes, and they tell their story. And I don't care if it's youth group or kids ministry or senior pastor, they all tell their story. So we had one who's a youth pastor. I mean, his church is dying, but his youth group's growing. We told the story of how he's reaching non-Christian kids and in teenagers in his area and starting a drop-in, and the stories he's telling us about people coming to Christ. And guess what? That inspires people. Hey, we got to try that. We got to do that. And not just for the youth, but for the whole church. So we tell that story. Um, so here's how we do it. We have a pipeline. So we start with secret shopper visits. So we go to the church unannounced. We just show up. And we have a list of kind of what we're looking for. Can we find you on the internet? Can we find your service times? Whatever. But we just show up. And some of them nowadays, I've been doing this so long, I'm not so secret to the pastor, but I am still secret to the congregation. And we just show up and we just check it out. You have to be on site. I'm at a new church every Sunday. You've got to show up as a coach. You got to just visit the church. You got to see what it's like to be a first timer in that church. And then from there, we move them into training. And so oftentimes it's just like, hey, we talk about what we saw and we say, hey, we can help your worship team. We can help your hospitality team. We can help your board. And that's all about just building trust. We just train and resource. And eventually what we're trying to move them into is a consultation. And so like Acts 2 is right now what we use as our primary method of consultation. We used to do a thing called discovery weekends, but we also use a thing called the chat church health assessment tool. We use whatever the church wants. Because here's what I know about a consultation is it's just 5 components. There has to be an assessment. So you have to be able to assess what's happening there. You got to be able to see the financials, see the stats, talk to the people. We do a pretty good assessment of the church, and that's what Acts 2 does. It gets them. It's often a self-assessment, but also you get there, you talk to them, you find out what's happening here, right? Like any doctor's of office, they give you the tests, right? Give me the tests, let me assess. And then the second thing is diagnosis. There needs to be a diagnosis. So you as a coach have to be able to say, okay, I know what's happening here. And I can talk, I'm not going to do it now, but I can talk you through how we diagnose, because we just understand that for churches to grow, people have to show up, they have to meet Jesus, and they have to stay. It's so simple, but you can reverse engineer those 3 things and kind of assess where the church, where that issue could lie in the church. So we have to have a diagnosis that they're aware of and they agree with. So again, you go to the doctor and say, hey, my elbow hurts. They do the tests, but they never tell you anything. They got to tell you this is what's going on. Then the third thing is a prescription. What's the plan? And Acts 2 for us, this whole process is the people doing all this work. When we've done other ways, we've done all the work. But what I love about Acts 2 is the people are doing all the work. The team is working it out. But you give yourself a prescription. Okay, what am I going to do over a year, over 12, 16 months? And then we do ongoing coaching towards that prescription. So we don't just say, okay, here you go, take 2. We just say, okay, let's meet next week. Let's meet next month. Let's meet with your board. And we keep coaching towards those prescriptions. Now we have a strategy. Now we have a pathway that we're on to coach. And then we added a thing called we call them cohorts, but they really are just bringing people together for a specific time period. And they have recently, in the last couple of years, become the mechanism for both coaching and for bringing along mid to late adopters. So we found instead of coaching one-on-one, we now coach in groups because it's faster and it's easier for us. And Zoom really helps us do that. Every month, I meet with 5 cohorts and we talk about what's going on and we give advice and we hear, and then I can follow up But in those cohort meetings, a lot of the good stuff, and they connect with others who are climbing the same hills they're climbing. But also, we've used cohorts to bring on people who maybe have resisted this over the last 5 years. And so now they join a cohort thinking, yeah, I could use that information. But what they're getting is more of that, like I talked to you about, that moving, that trade wind that's moving to souls and disciple making, soul winning. And what they find themselves talking about after the third or fourth meeting is they find themselves asking them, okay, how can my church reach more people? Which I love it when they do that, and I'm all for it. And then we develop coaches from those who have led turnaround churches. So we don't just, okay, we take those people who are leading in those situations and we help them to lead others, to coach others. We use their advice, we use their wisdom, we pair them up with other people, and they become, in essence, our coaches for our entire district. And so that's like a high level overview of coaching in our district. And I'll just finish up with this one slide so you can just get a sense of if I'm coming into a church, um, this is kind of what I'm looking at. I just call this my healthy church matrix, but I'm looking at, do you have a clear mission and vision? And again, a mission to me is not a mission statement. We know the mission, it's a great commission. The vision is what I'm after. Who are you trying to reach? What's the numbers behind that? Like, give me a goal. Are you relentlessly outward bound? This is something that we've developed over the last 6 years, and we find that this is that leg of the stool, that if they are relentlessly outbound, if they are reaching lost people, if they're always asking who's not yet in the room, it will begin to permeate all of the things that they do, from kids ministry to outreach to board meetings. It all becomes about being outbound. We talk about engaging services, and that means, are people greeted when they come in? Are they welcomed? Do they understand the music that's being sung? Is there a gospel message every week? That's a big one for us. Preach the gospel every week and invite people to respond every single week. That's been a bit of our secret sauce. When we see that happening in church, you know what happens? People come to Jesus. It's pretty cool. And then we talk about discipleship pathway. I had one pastor who went through revitalization and set a goal to see 12 people come to Christ. He actually saw 12 people come to Christ in the first 4 months. And I asked him the question, so what have you done with those people? And he's like, nothing. I'm like, what? I'm like, did you follow up with them? He said, well, I talk to them when they show up. I'm like, yeah, but did you give them a Bible? Like, what's the first 5 things you need to teach a new believer? He's like, I don't know. So I realized, oh my gosh, I need to coach you on that. So we're coaching them along a discipleship pathway. What does a fully devoted follower of Christ look like? What are the attitudes and actions that need to happen? And a lot of our pastors don't know how to do this. They don't know how to disciple. They think discipling is come and hear me preach. But as we know, if I wanted to become a mechanic by sitting in a classroom for 1 hour a week, you would not want me working on your car. So, you got to be in it. And then we go into intentional leadership development. How are we replacing ourselves? How are we leading others, developing the leaders around us? And again, the only way a church grows is if there's more leaders. Most churches are about 60 people because that's the amount of people that one person can handle without dying. Well, it's between 40 to 60. So if they want to grow, and you go to any church that's over 100, 200, 300, you'll see multiple leaders. When I say leaders, I don't just mean people who are overseeing, like who are doing things. I'm talking people who are leading people. And so you see that in the larger churches, and that's what we want to see in our churches. So we actually go into a church of like 60, and we actually have them develop a staff team, a volunteer staff team. And they have a staff team that they meet with every month, and then also one-on-one every month. And they're developing them to be the leaders of their church. It's quite a significant thing. So that's just the overview of the coaching, of kind of our strategy and how we turn like a network around. So you've got the book in front of you. You've heard me talk for the last 30 minutes. Thoughts, comments, questions?
Jeremiah, how many people are on the team that are making those touch points with pastors? One of the things that has always impressed me about what you all are doing is the engagement and touch points. Obviously, I mean, if I think you said 400 some calls in a month, that's not you making all of those calls, but that is a team.
Yeah. Yeah. So what we did is we took out any of the people that were like directors in our district, and we replaced them with coaches. And so we have 3 coaches now. And then we have a specialist. So we have a kids ministry specialist and a young leaders specialist who was there. They were formerly our directors for kids and families. And then we've taken any other position that we have, like an administrative position, and made it like a resourcing position. So we call them, events, instead of events manager, she's our events resourcer. And she not only does our events, but she writes blogs and talks about how do you make the most out of your events. So we just took everybody and made them a coach essentially. And every conversation that comes through our office, we're trying to teach, is it a coach? How can we turn this into a coaching conversation? Plus we developed a CRM. We use Salesforce, and that's just been the game changer for us because a lot of the stuff is automated too. You can automate a lot of the stuff if you think like that. Not we don't all think like that, and even like my boss does not think like that, but I do. Luckily, he gives me range to do it. But we use a CRM to help us track people, track who's talking to who, and track next steps with every single person in our region.
Jeremiah, I'd like to ask you, I mean, you have taken what, and probably a lot of districts here in the States, and you have turned everything upside down. So, and so I'm hearing, we became a resource center, and we hear that a lot, but I think this is the first time that I've heard that, you know, you truly are a resource center. Anything that the church is already doing or should be doing, we're going to resource them to do it, like your camps, your men retreat, women's retreat. That is like a major, major, major change and mindset. And it's not just that, but it sounds like there's just a huge paradigm shift now. People are thinking differently. And I know it's different in each situation. You know, we're in the more southern part of the United States, a little bit more traditional. But in that sense, can you just hit on maybe some of the top steps of how you got buy-in for that? I love it now because now it's, if you went back the other way, your church is probably thinking, no, don't do that. Leave us alone. But can you kind of dive in a little bit and share some highlights and maybe, I'm sure that not everybody was on board at the first time, and they may not all be now, but you guys, it sounds like you've been successful in turning that ship.
Well, we found that when we came in there is an ambivalence from our churches towards our district. The question is, what do you do at the district, right? You get that? And so there was this ambivalence, and so Paul Borden talked about this triangle, and normally what happens is the local church is at the bottom, and the middle judicatory is here, and then the denomination is here, and the churches are serving up. And so he just talked about in like flipping that triangle and saying like everything needs to serve down. And we just realized that our national office wasn't going to be able to do that. Like it's just not. If we left them do it, it wouldn't happen. So we let them do missions, we let them do the big stuff, go to the, world conferences, and we work with the churches. And what we've just found is, here's how we started. When we called the churches, I just said this: hey, I'm Jeremiah. I'm your free part-time staff member. That's how I introduced myself. And they're like, what? I said, yeah, I'm your free part-time staff member. You don't pay me. I'm here to help you. You need curriculum, I'll get it for you. And I would say most districts are resourcing in some way.
Yeah.
They do it anyway.
Yeah.
They provide curriculum, they can get you help, they can get you counseling. They do it anyway. They just don't market it like that. They market more like bureaucracy, that we're the bureaucratic center. And it's like, just don't think of yourself as a gateway that you have to come through to do ministry. Think of yourself as a platform that people can step on top of to reach further and higher in ministry. And if
Yeah.
it's just a mindset shift in the district level, your people are already asking for it, I guess is what I would tell you.
Yeah.
The stakeholders at the camps, they were hard. The stakeholders at the college, that was hard. Like I told you, the president, he dug his heels in. The camps, they weren't so certain. But you know what? We just held our youth camp, or youth and junior high and kids camp at our district camp, but it's run by one of our local churches in the area, and they had 3 times as many kids as they've ever had.
Wow.
And guess what? Those kids have a follow-up plan. Like because they're going back to where those people have people. You know what I mean? If
Yeah.
we ran it, if a district ran it, we'd be getting youth pastors from here and there to be the counselors, and there'd be no connection. So, and even our women's thing, it's like, why are we doing that? Get the women and we just encourage them. Like, we facilitate it in terms of like, hey, have you called this person, or get this lady to come speak, or do you know what I mean? Like, we help, but they do it, and then they get the follow-up. And I think you'll find that your churches will be very favorable to it. It's just the older, like the stakeholders may be the ones that need to shift, but they're not going to get the results unless they shift. And that's how you have to help them. Like, if you want this, you can't just keep doing the same thing over and over again, right? Shift how you think.
Yeah. It's good.
Is that helpful?
Yes. Thank you.
It's not easy.
So you talk about some of the churches that, I mean, kind of what you walked into, and maybe the ones that didn't, were more insider focused and just kind of thinking about all that. What were some of the biggest things that you saw in the shift? Was it you mentioned theology? Was it kind of the change in the theology in that church, or just uh, getting the pastors or the board behind? What were kind of some of the biggest things that you saw, the ones that went from not getting it to a bigger focus on evangelism?
I could do a whole seminar on that, because that's everything. There's a couple things I'll say. A lot of churches they substitute things. So they substitute prayer for action. So I pray, we pray. What do you do? They substitute hearing the word for doing the word. I had one church, oh, my pastor, he punches me in the face every Sunday with the word. He kicks me in the teeth with the word. I'm like, what are you, a masochist? What are you doing about it? Here's a big one we found. They substitute the gifts of the Holy Spirit as toys in the toy box to play with, rather than tools in the toolbox to accomplish a mission. So we have a lot of Pentecostals playing with the gifts of the Spirit like toys. Why was the Holy Spirit given? For witness, right? Like, to accomplish the task. And so we try and come after the substitute. Jesus didn't say admire me. He didn't say sing to me. He didn't even say learn about me. He said follow me. So we get right into that heart. So that's the theology piece. The heart piece that has to happen is from a preference driven me to a purpose driven or a mission driven mindset. So rather than what color are we going to have the carpet? Oh, the color I want. What kind of name are we going to have the church? Or the name I want? It's all me. We ask this question: if Jesus answered all your prayers right now, whose life other than your own and your family's would be changed? We're selfish. We pray for ourselves. We heal ourselves. So we have to shift from me to, okay, what kind of color are we going to have the carpet? Well, what color is going to reach Houston? What kind of songs are we going to sing? What songs are we going to reach Houston? When I pray for Houston. When I heal Houston. It's not me. And then the third thing is just mechanical. It's mechanical. Here's why I find what I find pastors. This is why I say revitalization doesn't work. Number one, pastors are not trained for it. They're trained to be chaplains. They're trained to rightly handle the word of truth and to deliver the sacraments. That's what they're trained for. Most of our Bible college train chaplains, at least up here in Canada. So they have to be trained. Number two, boards and councils don't hold them accountable for it. As long as the bills are paid and nobody's angry, boards are not asking, hey, where did people come to faith in Jesus this week? They're not asking that question. You can go through a whole board meeting and never talk about mission. Number three, congregants, quite frankly, don't want it. They don't want it because it's going to require they change. One pastor just told me last week they've had 30 new salvations over the summer, and he's telling me it's causing so much problems in the church because babies are making messes everywhere. Like they're coming from, in our context, they come from LGBTQ plus background, they come from transgender background, like they are, and they come with that, they come literally thinking, where's all the homosexuals in this church? Shouldn't it, like they have no idea. They don't know there's an Old Testament. They don't know there's a New Testament. They don't know anything. They are, in our context, they are very, very irreligious. And congregants are like, no, thank you. I don't want that. They don't look like me. They don't vote like me. They don't sound like me. Well, guess what? Welcome to the world, pal. Like that's like going to China and saying, you know what? I don't want to reach Chinese people. I just want to reach expats. You know what I mean? So, so they're not trained for it. Boards don't hold accountable to it. Congregations don't want it, and the community isn't asking for it. So it's not like the community is going to the church saying, please, will you help us? I always pray for the man from Macedonia to come and say, please, will you help us? So if we can switch that around, if we can train them, if we can get boards to hold accountable for it, if we can get congregations to be passionate about it. And how I do that is I put pictures of their grandkids on the screen. And I say to them, how many of your grandkids are serving Jesus? And a couple of hands go up and I say, do you want more of your grandkids to serve Jesus? Yes. Okay, then let's go together. Oh, not a dry eye in the place. They're in for their grandkids, right? And then we just teach them to reach the community. And then they start hearing stories, people coming saying, oh man, this church is so helpful. I had one congregant say, I love this church. It helps me get my crap together. Except she didn't say crap. She said another word, And I said, man, we need to put that on the church sign. So that's what you shift like that, you will see the changes. They want to see people come to Christ. They don't know how to do it. Telling somebody, hey, let's go out and witness. Hey, you need to evangelize. Hey, you need to invite someone to church. That does nothing for the church. You have to help them do it. You have to show them. You have to do training. You have to have invitable things. Otherwise, you hear like I had one pastor preach a whole sermon on why we need to preach the gospel. And guess what? At the end of the service, he never preached the gospel. Right? So he's telling us to do it, but he's not showing us how to do it. Preach the gospel every Sunday. Start there. We had one church, they would take 5 minutes in their service. This is how they started to change. And they had a box, and people would write the name of an unsaved person and put it in the box during worship. And then they would hold up the box and they would say, in this box contains the souls for whom Christ died. And we're going to take time right now and pray for every soul in this box. So they would not by name, but they would just pray over it every single Sunday. And you know what started to happen? People started coming to Christ, and they would preach the gospel every week. And that's how they kind of shifted. But there's a whole thing that we teach that helps churches get there. But I find that they want to see it. They don't know how. Make sense? Does that help you?
Yeah. That's
Okay.
good. Thank you.
Anything else? Oh yeah. Oh, thankful. I'm reading the chats here. Yeah, share the recording. And anything I can do. So you can I'll put I have an email called coach at abnwt.com, and you honestly can email me and we'll set up a 30-minute meeting or an hour meeting, and we'll just walk you through what we do. We're happy to do it. We don't have all the answers. But we have seen churches turn around, and I can tell you stories that'll encourage you. But I don't know if you're coaches or district people on this call, but if you can get your district somehow to move in this direction, it will help you as coaches.
Yeah, so a couple of things I put in the chat. Number one is a document called Transforming a Network of Churches, and that's what Gary Taitinger did. That was just a video, and I just transcribed it because I thought it was so good. So I don't know if he ever wrote it as an article, but I transcribed the video where he touches on a lot of these things that Jeremiah has said today. But you can get that from the chat there. And then this had a lot of resonances with a conversation we had a few months ago with Aaron Hlavin, who's the superintendent in the Michigan network. That is a network that has kind of put together an entire recalibration strategy for the network. And again, you'll see or you'll hear from him in that video recording a lot of similar themes to what was shared today. One of the things I appreciate about Jeremiah is that I feel like I could have a meeting with him and he could tell me 10 things that I'm doing wrong. And at the conclusion of the meeting, I'd feel good about myself and not discouraged. And I do think it's partially humorous, but I think that's kind of part of the anointing of being a revitalization coach, somebody who helps pastors to tell the truth, but to do it in a winsome way. So I really do appreciate that about you, Jeremiah, and the effort you're leading. So, well,
Thank you.
thanks for your time, everybody, today. Thanks, Jeremiah, for sharing with us. And we're better for it. Appreciate you.
Thanks, friends.